He was rebuilding his life after it was washed away.
Hurricane Harvey had such a devastating impact.
He lost his home. Still, he says, okay, this is the hand I was dealt. I'm going to keep going.
Even though it wasn't always easy.
He was suffering with mental illness and addiction.
He started going back to his doctor, and things got better.
Until weeks of silence led to a terrible discovery.
You in there?
He notices there's a smell.
I'm trying to find my brother.
What they find is a decomposing body.
Had struggles from his past snuck back in?
He's already dealing with a lot.
Could he have turned to drugs to drown his sorrows and accidentally overdosed?
Or is there more to this story?
They became closer friends, and eventually they had a sexual relationship.
She seemed a little bit jealous.
She was a compulsive liar.
She said, let me tell you something. I was like, what?
Theories are running wild at this point.
I thought she was playing.
What has happened here?
January 20th, 2018. It's Saturday evening in Houston, Texas, a sprawling coastal city of more than 2 million, struggling to recover from the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey.
Hurricane Harvey more than devastated the city of Houston.
You can't really meet someone in Houston that wasn't affected in one way or another by Hurricane Harvey.
The storm's impact is one of the reasons Ethan Brock is on his way to the west side of town to check on his stepbrother, 34-year-old Melvin Maxwell Jr.
Melvin had been living in a hotel since getting displaced by Hurricane Harvey.
It's been a few weeks, and Melvin's family has not heard from him.
Not only was cell service spotty in the hurricane's aftermath, Melvin had also stopped answering his hotel room's landline.
At first it would ring and then sound like somebody took it off the hook. I said, I wonder if he ignored me.
So that's why Ethan went by the hotel to just check on his brother.
There's a do not disturb sign on the door, but his brother ignores it.
Melvin, you in there?
He knocked on the door and nobody came.
Come on, Melvin. Not playing.
That's when Ethan catches the first whiff of real trouble.
His brother smelled something foul.
Instantly, he feels, oh my goodness, what has happened?
Melvin Maxwell Jr. had a tough life right from the start.
Melvin Jr. came into the world fighting. He was premature when he came in. They say he's gravely sick and we don't know if he's gonna survive. But he was a fighter.
But he could always rely on the loving support of his family.
I was his biggest cheerleader. I was crazy about him. His mom was crazy about him.
He is my only child. He was definitely a mama's boy. And he was my little guard, you know, my protector.
But it seemed there were always challenges trying to set him back.
He was smaller than most of the kids his age, and he struggled with that for a little while.
He was injured and lost his left eye. At the time, he was 3, and we didn't start seeing how it impacted his life till he got in school. And so he struggled reading.
But his tenacity helped him overcome any obstacle.
As he got older, he started going into football and weightlifting.
He did a lot of stuff, want to be bigger than what he was at times.
But the one thing Melvin couldn't outgrow were issues with his mental health.
He had been diagnosed by the psychiatrist as being bipolar, but he was always trying to do good.
He was diagnosed with ADHD and then schizophrenia.
I did a lot of praying to overcome it, but it started coming prevalent when he became an older man.
Bipolar disorder, ADHD, schizophrenia, none of these are mental health disorders that impact your intellect. It's just about how you're able to receive and give out information.
The doctor prescribed their medications. But as he got older, he started having other kind of mental problems.
Eventually, Melvin's prescribed medication evolved into self-medication.
As he got older, I believe he used drugs and different things to lift him up and bring him down.
When someone has mental illness and they have an addiction, it's kind of figuring out, is it a correlation or is it a causation? And it's really hard to determine which one it is. The correlation is, I just want to numb the pain.
He got hooked on smoking weed, then he got hooked on popping pills, and he was constantly trying to stop, but he never could stop.
But despite the challenges Melvin faced, finding a date wasn't one of them.
He was very attractive, so he had a lot of lady friends.
His first kid was born when he was 16 years old.
But it was far from his last.
He ended up with 7 children, 4 boys and 3 girls.
But while fatherhood came easy, finding a lasting relationship didn't.
He was married twice. His first wife, they got a divorce, and then he married his high school sweetheart.
But that relationship also ended in a separation.
But Melvin never turned his back on his children.
He adored all of his kids, and he was involved in each and every one of the lives of his kids.
He wanted to make sure that they had what they need. He was a good dad.
And he was determined to keep it that way.
He was really struggling. But when he started going back to his doctor, things got better.
Once he was regulated on his medication, Melvin was becoming a productive citizen.
It helped Melvin to become who he wanted to be, you know, a better father, a better son, a better brother, just showing up in a different way than how he had been showing up.
Then Hurricane Harvey made landfall in Texas.
Here comes Harvey, one of the most devastating hurricanes Houston has ever experienced. And Melvin loses everything once again.
He lost his home, I lost my home.
Melvin is already dealing with a lot. He's not just someone that has PTSD from the storm.
Despite the setback, Melvin is not fazed.
FEMA gave him a voucher for a hotel.
Which means Melvin could stay at a hotel of his choosing to get back on his feet.
With the voucher, Melvin moved into a hotel on the west side of Houston.
He says, okay, this is the hand I was dealt. I'm going to keep going.
And by the beginning of 2018, things seemed to be going pretty well.
He's still doing what he needs to do. He's still taking his medication.
So things are looking really good for Melvin.
But now his family is growing concerned after weeks of no contact from Melvin.
Mel, you in there?
You have so many things swirling in your head. Is this person okay?
Come on, man. I'm not playing.
Are they at the hospital? Is he in jail? Did he hurt someone?
And his brother's worry only increases when he notices a foul smell coming from Melvin's hotel room.
It makes him uneasy. He decides to call 911.
I'm trying to find my brother. I came over to the hotel where he was at. I went to the room and I knocked, but nobody came to the door.
And you think he's in that room?
I'm hoping he's not.
He needs HPD to come to do a welfare check on his brother.
But when the police arrive, Melvin still doesn't answer.
Police.
So a hotel employee is called and unlocks it for the officer.
Once they open the door, they realize where the smell was coming from.
They find a decomposing body.
In Houston, Texas, 34-year-old Melvin Maxwell Jr. was working hard to get back on his feet after losing everything to Hurricane Harvey.
Natural disasters can have an everlasting impact on people. But then you add on the fact that he was suffering with mental illness and addiction. Those are two tremendous things to try to recover from. And so he was someone who was courageous.
But now Houston police officers have just found a dead body inside the room where Melvin has been living since the hurricane destroyed his home.
The body's so decomposed, they can't immediately identify who it is.
All they know for sure is that the body is a black male.
There's nothing that indicates foul play.
Call it in. I need the coroner to my location.
But just in case, officers notify the homicide unit.
The police also escort Ethan, who is Melvin's brother, out of the room.
He was overcome with emotion.
Seeing a body that is unrecognizable is devastating because you just hope that, I think that's my brother, but I'm not really sure.
However, when detectives arrive on the scene, they quickly conclude that the body is likely Melvin's.
The room is rented to Melvin. There are prescription bottles found with Melvin's name on it. There's a wallet found, and his identifying information is still there.
There's also a social security card and some credit cards in Melvin's name.
So now they're just trying to figure out what has happened here.
When detectives take a closer look at the body, the level of decomposition makes it difficult to determine what happened to him.
The body's going to have to go to the medical examiner to make the final determination of whether foul play was involved.
Leaving CSI to process the scene, detectives head down to the lobby where Melvin's father and his brother Ethan are waiting.
After the officers escorted him out of the room, Ethan called the family with the news.
I was just devastated. I didn't want to live anymore.
Once Ethan called me and told me that he was dead, I came up to the hotel.
Melvin's father was willing to give the police any information they needed in regards to his son.
Can you tell us when was the last time you had contact with Melvin?
It's been a couple of weeks.
Melvin and his family communicate on a regular basis. They were able to see him during Christmas. They text him during the New Year. Things were going well for Melvin.
The last time that they spoke was on January the 4th.
And then all of a sudden, there's no communication whatsoever.
Initially, the family thought maybe he was having issues with his cell phone.
But they also informed detectives there were times when Melvin would go MIA.
It wasn't unusual for there to be a couple of days where they didn't hear from him.
My son had times in his life where he didn't want to be bothered, so he wouldn't call. And I just assumed he was going through a stage like that.
But then days with no word from Melvin turned into weeks.
They started to become worried, so that's what precipitated the welfare call.
If he has a history of silence, what made you more concerned this time around?
Ethan Melvin Sr. advised detectives of Melvin's long struggles with mental illness.
The investigators learned that Melvin Jr. had schizophrenia and bipolar. And so, he had his issues that he had to deal with.
On top of that, they tell detectives that Melvin has had to overcome addiction.
Melvin's been going through a lot lately, including losing his house during Harvey.
Maybe Melvin had a manic episode and hurt himself or someone else.
Man, we called to everywhere that we could think of, but no one's seen it.
The family becomes extremely worried.
That's what made me drive up here tonight.
To detectives, it's seeming like Melvin's death isn't the result of a homicide at all.
Did he fall into depression?
Okay, you mentioned that he may have struggled with addiction. Is it possible that he could have overdosed?
Detectives investigating the death of Melvin Maxwell Jr. have learned that the 34-year-old had long been struggling with addiction, as well as his mental health.
Is it possible that he could have overdosed?
So detectives are wondering if Melvin's addiction got the best of him.
Ethan said no, he would never overdose.
No, not Melvin. No way.
It will take an autopsy to determine the cause of death. But in the interim, detectives want to know if Melvin had problems with anyone.
After all, severe mental illness and addiction can have a negative impact on relationships.
The investigators want to know who's closest to Melvin.
Did he have any romantic relationships?
Well, he was divorced from his first wife, and then things fell apart with his second wife.
He had just broke up with my youngest grandson's mother, so they were married but separated.
He had also started a new relationship with a woman in Houston.
He decided on a rebound.
That rebound happens to be an older woman, 44-year-old Shaterika Purvis.
Melvin, is that you?
Oh, man, yeah.
Shaterika was a family friend.
What are you doing here?
I'm visiting my aunt, man. How you been?
Good.
He met Shaterika because Shaterika and her mother lived in the same apartment complex as my sister.
She and Melvin had known each other for some time, but had just reconnected recently.
We should get together sometime.
Okay. Definitely.
Shortly after that, they became closer friends, and eventually they had a sexual relationship.
But it's not just his romantic relationships detectives have to investigate.
Okay, guys, can you think of any other relationships, close friendships that he might have had?
Actually, I believe he was friendly with one of the staff here at the hotel.
She's a security guard. He would come downstairs and he would talk to her sometimes.
All right, guys, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
After wrapping up with Melvin's family, detectives check in with hotel management about this security guard.
They find out her name is Janelle Richards.
But she doesn't work here anymore, though.
Janelle had just resigned prior to the discovery of Melvin's body.
Oh, really?
The timing of her resignation is a little suspicious.
Detectives also want to know if anyone has been in Melvin's room recently.
He actually asked us to stop coming in a while ago.
His do not disturb sign was on the door.
Which means nobody had entered for weeks.
However, they did notice him come down for breakfast a few times during the new year.
But they don't remember him having breakfast past the first few days in January.
Given that the family's last communication with Melvin was on January 4th, and law enforcement discovered his body on January 20th, it creates a wide window of time that Melvin was unaccounted for.
Hindsight said I should have went to that hotel and checked on him once. I wasn't able to get in contact with him for a couple of days. It was terrible for him to sit up in that room all that time.
Back at the station, detectives reach out to Janelle.
Hello? She's more than willing to talk.
She tells them, oh yes, I did strike up a friendship with Melvin.
I knew that he was there with the hurricane. I would see him every time I was at work.
They would speak from time to time when he would come downstairs to get something to eat or come downstairs for coffee.
You know, you see them almost every day. You talk to them, see how their day is. And so you begin to talk about your life.
Detectives want to know if Janelle ever saw Melvin with anyone.
Janelle states that she did see a woman with Melvin from time to time. She was a light-skinned Black woman who appeared to be just a bit older than Melvin.
Never heard her name.
By all accounts, seems like it matches the description of Shaterica. So when officers asked Janelle if she noticed any friction between Melvin and Shaterica, Janelle says no.
Janelle tells them it seems like everything was fine.
But there was one time where she felt like Shaterica was kind of giving her a little attitude.
He didn't introduce us to anything. She just asked who was I, and he said that's the overnight security.
Shaterica seemed to be upset and maybe a little jealous.
Shaterica was a little bit older than Melvin, and she probably felt threatened walking into where he lives, seeing a beautiful security guard standing there that seems familiar with her boyfriend.
See you later. It was good seeing you.
You too.
Thank you.
Now wondering if jealousy could be the motive behind Melvin's death rather than an overdose, detectives turn their attention to Shaterica.
We just tasked with trying to find out what may have happened to him. I'm calling ahead because we'll be out of the office until Friday. But is there a way we can sit you down for about, say, 9:30 on Friday?
Okay, then I'll see you at 9:30.
Almost a week after discovering Melvin's body, Shaterica arrives for her interview.
Shaterica comes down voluntarily.
Thank you for coming in. Can you tell us about your relationship with Melvin?
And she seems upfront when she sits down with detectives.
She reveals that she and Melvin are in a relationship and that relationship started in November around Thanksgiving.
I hadn't seen him for a long time, but we got together after the hurricane.
Shaterica tells the detectives that she, on occasion, stays with Melvin.
When was the last time you saw him?
It was the night of January 6th.
And there's a reason she remembers the date so clearly.
Shaterica decided to break things off with him that night.
I'm done. I'm done.
Hey, baby, please don't go.
Shaterica Purvis has just told Houston detectives that Melvin Maxwell Jr. was alive and well when she left him on January 6th, the night she ended their relationship.
Now, detectives want to know what led up to the breakup.
We always had a lot of fun together, but that was a problem.
Her and Melvin were getting high and drunk together.
But then she left because he didn't have no money. She said that he ran out of money, so she left him.
She's frustrated. She tells police that on that night, she waited until about 11 p.m. or so for Melvin to fall asleep. She quietly grabs her things. She goes to the lobby and she calls her daughter for a ride.
Called my daughter, she picked me up, and that was it.
They continue to question her, has she heard from Melvin since that night? And she says, no.
She had assumed once he woke up, he would understand because my stuff was not there that I did not want to see him or speak with him.
Okay.
You're free to go.
All right, thank you.
After talking to Shaterika, detectives make a call to her daughter to confirm her story.
Yes, it's correct. I picked up.
Do you remember by what time?
No, I can't tell you what time because I was asleep. And when she called, I just got up.
She doesn't remember the time, but she does remember dropping her mother off at her grandmother's apartment.
She also tells detectives that she never really liked Melvin.
He's very disrespectful, so I don't trust him.
Thank you.
After talking to the daughter, detectives feel like Shaterika's statement lines up.
It also matches the time frame given by Melvin's family and the hotel staff.
Had the breakup been one setback too many for Melvin?
Could he have turned to drugs to drown his sorrows and accidentally overdosed?
But an overdose is definitively ruled out when detectives get the autopsy results back from the coroner.
Melvin was stabbed.
The medical examiner found a 4-inch cut on the left side of the chest and a small cut under the right arm.
It wasn't easy for them to figure that out because Melvin's body has been decomposed for a couple of weeks at this point.
Based on this new information, detectives are again faced with a question.
Who could have done this?
With it being a stab wound and him being found in his hotel, it's got to be a crime of passion. So who would have had entrance and had the ability to be inside of that hotel room? And so now attention goes back to the security officer, Miss Janelle.
Maybe she was friendlier with Melvin than she had let on.
Or was it his girlfriend who, according to a statement, was likely the last person to see him alive?
Detectives aren't sure which avenue to pursue until a call comes in.
Out of nowhere, police get a tip from Melvin Sr. that he has spoken to a lady that lives in the complex with them, which Shaterika happens to be residing in.
The woman's name is Lorraine Wilson.
And according to Lorraine, Shaterika had come to her a couple weeks earlier with a shocking confession.
Y'all, I just killed someone.
What?
Detectives investigating the murder of Melvin Maxwell Jr. have just learned that his girlfriend, Shaterika Purvis, may have confessed to the crime.
According to Melvin's father, Shaterika told a neighbor named Lorraine Wilson that she had killed someone.
What?
So police reach out to Lorraine.
Hello?
She tells them she is willing to speak with them.
So apparently you had talked with a Mr. Melvin Maxwell Sr.?
Yes, sir.
Lorraine tells them that she doesn't know Shaterika very well, but they would see each other while in the complex. But they also shared a mutual friend who also lived in the complex.
And one night, she happened to run into Shaterika at the mailboxes.
And during this interaction, Shaterika seemed out of sorts.
And she said, "Oh, I just don't feel right. I just not feeling good."
Shaterika says, "Hey, do you know if Felicia is at home?" And she's like, "Hey, I don't know, but I can walk upstairs with you to check it out."
Felicia was their mutual friend.
So they went to the apartment of Felicia Ramos, where she was with her cousin, Walter Ramos.
She followed behind me, kind of like upset.
When they come inside, Shaterika makes a unusual statement.
She said, "Let me tell you something. I just killed somebody." I was like, "What?" She said, "I just killed somebody."
She said she got into it with this gentleman and she killed him.
She got a big mission instead.
But Lorraine says she and the other two people in the room were skeptical.
I said, well, don't look like he would have been to the club. I thought she was playing.
Shaterica's known to make these wild stories up, so the majority of the people are just, blowing it off like, whatever.
Lorraine says she left shortly after and didn't think about it again.
It's not until she heard that Melvin was murdered at a hotel that causes Lorraine to reach out to Melvin Sr.
Thank you.
After hanging up with Lorraine, detectives immediately reach out to the two other witnesses mentioned in her statement.
Being a part of an investigation, you have to corroborate statements with other statements.
So police reach out to Felicia.
Did you recall her telling any kind of story to you with anyone else in this conflict?
I don't believe nothing nobody say.
Felicia basically says nobody pays attention to her. It's like the little boy who cried wolf.
So again, a second person had brushed it off because it seemed so random.
Felicia's cousin, Walter, echoes her sentiment.
It was late at night and we was having us a good time. So this lady came in and said, I just killed somebody. Nobody took it serious.
And so now it's three people that feels she's made up something.
Shaterica's statements seem damning to detectives.
You have people that are sharing what appears to be a confession.
But does that mean she is actually guilty?
Keep in mind, this is a person that's known for not always telling the truth.
Or maybe when she told Melvin she wanted to break up with him, things got out of hand.
So the investigators subpoenaed her phone records.
And when the records come back, investigators' suspicions about Shaterica grow.
It turns out Shaterica did not call her daughter on January 6th like she initially told police.
What they found out was that on January the 4th, in between 11:30 and midnight, Shaterica made a call to her daughter to come pick her up from the hotel.
This also lines up with the last day that Melvin spoke to his family.
They compare that to Melvin's phone records, and again, they see the last outgoing call was on January the 4th, and then there are a lot of incoming calls, but they went unanswered.
So now detectives are left wondering, did she mix up dates or did she lie on purpose?
Detectives decide they need to bring Shaterica back down to the station for another interview to clear things up.
But when they go by her place, they're met with a surprise.
They can't find her.
Shaterica is on the run.
When detectives investigating Melvin Maxwell Jr.'s murder attempt to locate Shaterica Purvis, hoping to clear up some discrepancies in her statement, she's suddenly nowhere to be found.
To detectives, it seems like a clear indication of guilt.
So at this point now, Shaterica is the prime suspect.
And with Shaterica now a fugitive, detectives contact the Gulf Coast Task Force.
We're less than 6 hours away from the border of Mexico. Most officers feel like, hey, we need to let Border Patrol know, and also let's let the U.S. Marshals know just in case she's trying to go on by a plane.
On June 28th, detectives get a hit.
What's up?
They get a phone call from Atlanta, Georgia.
It turns out she did indeed make a run for it, but it wasn't to the border or to Mexico. She was flagged in Atlanta while trying to board a flight to Jamaica.
She was going through U.S. Customs. They checked her name out and found out she had an open warrant for murder in Houston, Texas.
Customs agents take Shaterica into custody and contact the authorities in Houston.
Houston investigators came to interview her in Atlanta, and they asked her exactly what happened.
They are trying their best to get a confession, and Shaterica is not budging.
I told you I didn't do anything. I was just going on vacation.
They continued to press her.
They started throwing in different things in that interview, giving her a little room where maybe he got aggressive with you.
Slowly but surely, they break her down, and she starts to open up a little bit more.
Okay. It was the day of the 4th. We were having an argument about me leaving.
She tells them he came up from behind her and put his hand on her shoulders.
Hey, don't go, please.
Shaterica explains to detectives that she had been assaulted in the past.
She was still a little nervous and skittish about being touched. So when Melvin puts his hands on her shoulder, she freaks out.
And because he wouldn't get out of her personal space, she grabbed a butcher knife and stabbed him.
Get away from me!
The knife was one that they kept in the room for cooking.
She stabbed Melvin, and Melvin immediately goes and sits on the bed.
She tells officers that Melvin was still alive. He had sat on the bed. He was holding the spot where he was stabbed.
To Shaterica, hey, this was a minor injury. I just needed to get him off of me so I can leave. She packs up her stuff and she leaves.
I didn't mean to do it.
She assumed that he would call for help.
She didn't expect for him to die.
But for the detectives, her explanation comes far too late.
After giving her statement, her confession, Shaterica is arrested for murder.
In September 2021, Shaterica arrives back in Houston to await trial. And Melvin's family rejoices.
I think she thought she had got away with the crime. I was happy that they finally got her.
I had relief that finally justice would be served, finally that we can have some kind of closure.
But Shaterica will never stand trial for Melvin's murder.
While she's awaiting trial, she took a plea deal. The state offered her 22 years for a murder charge, which she accepted.
She's eligible for parole after serving half her sentence.
We was hoping that she would get 45 years, but we didn't want to really go through that brutal thing of seeing all that evidence.
I don't know if I could have took it sitting up in court, looking at all the gory stuff and all the negativity that would be brought up about him, and he wasn't here to defend himself.
Instead, Melvin's family focuses on healing.
I forgave her for me, so I can live, and so I can continue to love my son and continue to be there for his children. Nobody has control over death. Only God.
Although moving on doesn't mean letting go of the son and father they all loved.
His children are very resilient. Even the baby. I've got pictures all over the house. I talk to him every day about his dad. And so that he knows that his dad really loved him.
My prayers is to give me strength to make it through it. But I'm also a realist. You know, I realize that I'm never gonna be okay. It's heartbreaking. And no parent should bury their kid. It's just against all the rules of nature. It's hard, you never get over it.
Our children are precious, and they can be here today and gone tomorrow. I will always love Melvin Joseph Maxwell Jr., and may he rest in heaven peacefully.
On the afternoon of November 1st, 1991, The University of Iowa looked exactly as a university should. Students crossed the campus carrying backpacks filled with books and research papers. Professors hurried between offices and classrooms, preparing lectures, answering questions, and attending meetings that seemed no different from countless others before them. It was a Friday, a day that often carried a quieter rhythm than the rest of the academic week. There was no sign that within minutes, the campus would become the scene of one of the deadliest university shootings in American history. Long before school shootings became a grim and familiar headline across the United States, Iowa City was known for scholarship rather than violence. The university was respected for its research programs, attracting talented students from around the world who dreamed of contributing to science, medicine, literature, and engineering. Among those students was a young physicist whose academic achievements had once promised a brilliant future. His name was Gang Liu. To many people who knew him, he represented determination and exceptional intelligence. Born in China in 1963, he had distinguished himself from an early age through extraordinary academic performance. His abilities eventually earned him a place in the prestigious China U.S. Physics Examination and Application Program, commonly known as CUSPIA, an initiative established by Nobel Prize-winning physicist Tsung-Dao Lee to help gifted Chinese students pursue graduate education in the United States. It was an opportunity reserved for only the most talented minds. For Gang Liu, it was the realization of years of dedication. He left China with hopes shared by countless young scholars to build a successful career, contribute to scientific discovery, and establish himself among the international academic community. At the University of Iowa, he entered the Department of Physics and Astronomy, specializing in plasma physics. His research focused on a highly technical subject titled Study of the Critical Ionization Velocity effect by particle-in-cell simulation. Completing such research required years of discipline, patience, and intellectual rigor. Faculty members recognized that Gang Liu possessed remarkable technical ability. They described him as intelligent, hardworking, meticulous, and intensely committed to his research. Yet alongside those strengths were qualities that complicated his relationships with others. He was quiet and reserved. He preferred working alone rather than collaborating with classmates. He reacted strongly to criticism and appeared deeply affected whenever he believed his work was underestimated. Those characteristics, while not unusual in highly competitive academic environments, would later become important pieces of a much larger story. By 1991, Gang Liu had successfully defended his doctoral dissertation. Objectively, he had accomplished what many graduate students spend years striving to achieve. But in his own mind, success was no longer enough. He believed he deserved the university's prestigious D.C. Spriestersback Dissertation Prize, an award that recognized exceptional doctoral research. Beyond its monetary value of approximately $2,500, the prize represented something far more significant: recognition. It symbolized acceptance by one's peers, validation by respected faculty, and an important distinction that could strengthen an academic career. When the nomination instead went to another researcher, Linhua Shan, Gang Liu became convinced that he had been treated unfairly. Shan was not a stranger. The two men had once been roommates after arriving in the United States. According to the information later gathered during the investigation, Gang Liu believed his dissertation was superior and that the faculty had deliberately denied him the recognition he deserved. His disappointment gradually transformed into resentment. He submitted complaints. He wrote letters. He argued that the department had acted with bias and that influential professors were damaging his future. He came to believe that his academic career had been sabotaged and that he had been discriminated against because he was a foreign student. None of his complaints changed the university's decisions. As weeks passed, those grievances did not fade. Instead, investigators would later conclude that they became increasingly fixed in his mind. While the university continued with its normal routines, Gang Liu's anger quietly deepened. In the weeks leading to November 1st, he legally purchased a Taurus .38 special revolver. He also possessed a Jennings J22 pistol, although it would not be used during the attack. Investigators later discovered evidence that he had practiced shooting accumulated ammunition, monitored the schedules of faculty meetings, and identified specific individuals he intended to target. These findings would ultimately convince investigators that what happened on November 1st was not the result of a sudden emotional breakdown, but a carefully planned act directed at people he believed had destroyed his academic future. Yet on that Friday afternoon, none of those preparations were visible to the professors gathering inside Van Allen Hall. Around 3:42 p.m., members of the Department of Physics and Astronomy assembled in room 309 for a routine research meeting. Such meetings were ordinary parts of university life. Faculty discussed research projects, departmental matters, and ongoing scientific work. Students and researchers attended expecting another professional conversation among colleagues. Gang Lu entered the room. His presence raised no immediate concern. He belonged there. He had studied within the department, worked alongside many of the people present, and was familiar to those around him. Nothing about his arrival suggested that the next few moments would permanently alter the lives of everyone inside the building. Then, without warning, he produced a .38 caliber revolver. The first shot shattered the normal rhythm of the afternoon. Within seconds, confusion replaced routine. Conversations stopped instantly. People struggled to understand what was happening. Some froze in disbelief. Others attempted to escape. Before anyone could organize a response, Gang Lu had already begun targeting individuals connected to the academic grievances that had consumed him. According to witnesses, he remained remarkably calm throughout the attack. He spoke very little, if at all. There was no extended confrontation, no heated argument, and no dramatic exchange of words. Instead, the violence unfolded with chilling purpose. In less than 2 minutes, Professor Christoph Gertz, Professor Robert Allen Smith, and researcher Lin Huashan had been shot. Gang Lu then left the meeting room in search of Department Chair Dwight R. Nicholson, locating him elsewhere in Van Allen Hall and shooting him as well. Before leaving the building, he returned to room 309 and fired additional shots at Robert Smith, who had initially survived the first volley. Every movement suggested intention rather than panic. Every target reflected a grievance that investigators would later reconstruct piece by piece. But the violence was not over. After leaving Van Allen Hall, Gang Lu crossed the campus toward Jessup Hall, the university's central administration building. His next destination was the office of T. and Cleary, Vice President for Academic Affairs, who had been responsible for reviewing academic complaints. There, another chapter of the tragedy would unfold before the attack finally ended with Gang Lu turning the weapon on himself. By the time the shooting was over, 5 people had lost their lives. A 6th victim would later die from long-term complications, and an entire university community would be left searching for answers that could never fully explain how a place devoted to learning had become the setting for unimaginable violence. This is the story of the University of Iowa murders, not a random act of violence, but a targeted attack shaped by years of achievement, disappointment, resentment, and ultimately, irreversible loss. To understand the tragedy that unfolded on November 1st, 1991, it is necessary to first understand the environment in which it occurred. The University of Iowa was not simply a collection of classrooms and laboratories. It was a community built around the pursuit of knowledge, where thousands of students and faculty members devoted themselves to research, education, and discovery. Every building on campus served a purpose, every office represented years of scholarship, and every research meeting reflected the collaborative effort required to advance scientific understanding. For those who worked there, the university was more than a workplace. It was where careers were built, ideas were tested, and future generations of scientists and scholars were trained. Among its many academic departments, The Department of Physics and Astronomy occupied an important place within the university's research community. Scientists in the department investigated complex questions involving plasma physics, astronomy, and other advanced fields that demanded years of education and highly specialized expertise. Research was rarely the work of a single individual. Professors supervised graduate students, faculty members served on dissertation committees, and researchers regularly gathered to exchange ideas, evaluate progress, and provide constructive criticism. Success depended not only on intelligence, but also on collaboration, trust, and professional respect. Graduate education, particularly at the doctoral level, is a demanding process measured over many years. Students are expected to produce original research that contributes new knowledge to their field. Along the way, they receive guidance from advisors, defend their ideas before committees, revise their work repeatedly, and learn to accept criticism as part of scientific progress. Recognition within this environment carries significant weight. Academic awards, dissertation prizes, and faculty recommendations can influence future opportunities, helping young researchers secure positions at universities or research institutions. Although competition naturally exists, the system depends on the expectation that disagreements remain professional and that decisions are ultimately accepted through established academic procedures. On the afternoon of November 1st, those expectations would be shattered. The people gathered in Van Allen Hall represented decades of experience and accomplishment. None of them anticipated that routine academic responsibilities would place them directly in the path of carefully planned violence. The first victim was Professor Christoph K. Gertz, one of the department's most respected scientists. He was recognized as an accomplished physicist whose work in plasma physics had earned him the respect of colleagues and students alike. Beyond his research, he served as Gang Lu's doctoral advisor, guiding the dissertation that Lu successfully completed earlier that year. The relationship between a doctoral advisor and a graduate student is often one of the closest professional partnerships within academia. Advisors spend years helping students refine research questions, overcome technical challenges, and prepare for careers beyond graduate school. Professor Gertz had fulfilled that role for Gang Lu, working alongside him throughout the demanding process of earning a doctorate. On November 1st, he attended what he believed would be another ordinary research meeting. Instead, he became one of the first people targeted during the attack and was killed at the scene. Another victim was Professor Robert Allen Smith, a faculty member in the Department of Physics and Astronomy who also served on Gang Lu's dissertation committee. Committee members play a critical role in evaluating doctoral research, ensuring that dissertations meet the rigorous standards required for the highest academic degree. Their responsibility is not only to judge scientific quality, but also to challenge assumptions, ask difficult questions, and maintain the integrity of the academic process. According to the investigation, Robert Smith was among the individuals Gang Lu believed had contributed to his perceived mistreatment. During the attack inside room 309, Smith was shot multiple times. Although he initially survived the first series of gunshots, Gang Lu later returned to the room and fired additional shots at him, ensuring that he would not survive. Investigators later viewed this return as evidence that the attack was not chaotic or impulsive but directed towards specific individuals. The third victim was Linhua Shan, a researcher whose name would become central to understanding Gang Lu's motive. Shan had once shared a close connection with Lu. The two had reportedly been roommates after arriving in the United States. Both were talented researchers pursuing successful academic careers within the same department. Yet their professional paths eventually diverged in a way that deeply affected Gang Lu. When the nomination for the prestigious D.C. Spreestersback Dissertation Prize was awarded to Shan rather than Lu, Gang Lu became convinced that he had been unfairly denied recognition he believed he deserved. Investigators later concluded that Shan became one of the principal targets of the attack because Gang Lu associated him with the disappointment that had gradually consumed him. Sean was killed during the initial shooting inside the meeting room. The violence did not end there. After leaving room 309, Gang Lu deliberately searched for Professor Dwight R. Nicholson, the chair of the Department of Physics and Astronomy. As department chair, Nicholson carried significant administrative responsibility. He oversaw departmental operations, faculty matters, and many aspects of graduate education. Leadership positions within universities often require making difficult decisions that cannot satisfy everyone involved. According to investigators, Gang Lu believed Nicholson was among those responsible for the academic decisions that he considered unfair. Gang Lu located Nicholson in his office and shot him multiple times. Nicholson died almost immediately. His death represented not only the loss of an experienced academic leader, but also another example of how carefully Gang Lu had selected his victims. Rather than attacking indiscriminately, he sought out individuals connected to his personal grievances. The next destination was Jessup Hall, the university's administrative center. There worked T. and Cleary, vice president for academic affairs. Her responsibilities included overseeing academic policies and reviewing formal complaints submitted by students. During the months leading up to the shooting, Gang Lu had filed complaints regarding what he believed was unfair treatment by the department. Because Cleary's office handled such matters, investigators later concluded that Gang Lu viewed her as another person who had failed to correct what he considered an injustice. When he entered her office, he opened fire immediately, and Cleary suffered severe gunshot wounds and was transported to the hospital. Despite medical efforts, she died the following day. Her death extended the tragedy beyond the physics department, demonstrating that Gang Lu's grievances reached into the university's highest levels of academic administration. Also inside Cleary's office was Mia Rodolfo-Siason, a student employee working part-time. Unlike the others who had been deliberately targeted because of their professional roles, Rodolfo-Siason was an innocent bystander. She had no involvement in dissertation committees, academic awards, or administrative decisions concerning Gang Lu. Nevertheless, she became another victim when she was struck by gunfire. The injuries she sustained damaged her spinal cord, leaving her paralyzed from the neck down. Although she survived the immediate attack, her life changed permanently in those few seconds. She lived for many years with profound physical limitations before dying in 2008 from complications related to those injuries. Her death later brought the total number of fatalities connected to the shooting to 6. The stories of these victims reveal an important truth about the University of Iowa murders. They were not strangers gathered by chance. They were professors, researchers, administrators, and a student employee connected by the ordinary routines of university life. Each person had arrived at work expecting another normal Friday devoted to education and research. None anticipated becoming part of one of the darkest chapters in the institution's history. The attack also demonstrated the devastating impact that targeted violence can have within an academic community. Every victim represented years of knowledge, mentorship, and service. Their colleagues lost trusted collaborators. Students lost teachers and advisors. Families lost loved ones. An innocent student employee lost her health and, years later, ultimately her life because she happened to be present when violence entered a place dedicated to learning. Long after the gunfire ended, the names of Christoph K. Gertz, Robert Allen Smith, Linhua Sean, Dwight R. Nicholson, T. and Cleary, and Mia Rodolfo-Siason would remain inseparable from the history of the University of Iowa. Their stories remind us that behind every major criminal case are individuals whose lives extended far beyond the headlines, and whose absence would continue to shape the university community for decades after that quiet Friday afternoon in November came to its tragic end. Long before his name became associated with one of the deadliest university shootings in American history, Gang Lu was known for something entirely different. To classmates and professors, he was recognized as an exceptionally intelligent young physicist whose academic abilities had earned admiration long before he arrived in the United States. His story did not begin with violence. It began with ambition, discipline, and years of extraordinary academic achievement. Understanding that journey does not excuse what he eventually did, nor does it diminish the suffering of the victims and their families. Instead, it provides important context for understanding how investigators later reconstructed the motive behind a carefully planned attack that forever changed the University of Iowa. Gang Lu was born in China in 1963, a period when educational opportunities for exceptionally gifted students carried enormous significance. From an early age, he established a reputation as an outstanding student. His academic performance consistently distinguished him from his peers, and those abilities eventually opened doors that only a small number of students could hope to enter. In the mid-1980s, China's scientific community was increasingly connected with universities in the United States through academic exchange programs designed to cultivate the next generation of researchers. Among the most prestigious of these opportunities was the China U.S. Physics Examination and Application Program, widely known as CUSPIA, created by Nobel Prize-winning physicist Tsung-Dao Lee. The program was intended to identify highly talented Chinese physics students and provide them with opportunities to pursue graduate education at leading American universities. Admission into CUSPIA required exceptional academic performance and represented a remarkable achievement in itself. Gang Lu successfully passed the highly competitive selection process, demonstrating that he possessed the intellectual ability expected of future scientists capable of contributing to advanced research. For many participants, acceptance into the program represented the beginning of an entirely new life. It meant leaving familiar surroundings, adapting to a different language and culture, and entering one of the world's most demanding academic environments. Like many international students, Gang Lu arrived in the United States carrying not only personal ambition, but also the expectations of family, teachers, and institutions that had invested in his future. He chose to continue his education at the University of Iowa, joining the Department of Physics and Astronomy. There, he focused on plasma physics, an area of research involving highly complex scientific questions and sophisticated computational methods. Doctoral research in such a field requires years of careful experimentation, theoretical analysis, and technical precision. Graduate students often spend long hours working independently, solving problems that may take months or even years to understand. Progress can be slow, setbacks are common, and success depends upon persistence as much as intelligence. By every available account contained within the investigation, Gang Lu possessed the intellectual ability necessary to thrive in that environment. He eventually completed a dissertation entitled Study of the Critical Ionization Velocity Effect by Particle-in-Cell Simulation, successfully defending his work and earning his doctoral degree in 1991. Completing a PhD represents one of the highest academic accomplishments in higher education. It signifies that a researcher has contributed original knowledge to his or her discipline and is prepared to join the broader scientific community as an independent scholar. For most doctoral graduates, that moment marks the beginning of new professional opportunities. For Gang Lu, however, it became the beginning of a very different path. Faculty members who worked with him generally agreed on several aspects of his personality. They described him as highly intelligent, meticulous, and deeply committed to his research. His work ethic was not questioned, nor was his technical competence. At the same time, many colleagues also observed characteristics that complicated his relationships within the department. He was quiet and reserved, often keeping to himself rather than participating in broader social interactions. He preferred working independently and was not known as someone who easily collaborated with others. More significantly, several professors noted that he reacted strongly to criticism. Scientific research depends upon constant evaluation, revision, and debate. Every researcher must accept that ideas will be challenged and that conclusions will be questioned. Before they are accepted, According to those who knew him, Gang Lu found these situations particularly difficult. He appeared unusually sensitive whenever he believed his work had been underestimated or when he felt he had not received the recognition he deserved. Such traits alone do not predict violence, and countless successful researchers possess strong personalities or intense emotional investment in their work. Nevertheless, investigators later viewed these characteristics as part of the broader context surrounding the events of 1991. After successfully defending his dissertation, Gang Lu expected another important milestone to follow. He believed he would receive the D.C. Spreestersback Dissertation Prize, one of the university's most prestigious awards for outstanding doctoral research. The award carried a monetary value of approximately $2,500, but its symbolic importance far exceeded its financial reward. Receiving such recognition could strengthen an academic resume, increase professional visibility, and serve as public acknowledgement from respected faculty that one's research represented exceptional achievement. For a young scientist hoping to build a career, such recognition could carry considerable significance. Gang Lu became convinced that his dissertation was the strongest among the candidates and that the prize should naturally be awarded to him. Instead, the nomination went to Lin Huashan, another researcher within the department who had once been Gang Lu's roommate after both arrived in the United States. Although there is no evidence that Shan himself influenced the selection process, the outcome profoundly affected Gang Lu. According to the investigation, he interpreted the decision not simply as professional disappointment, but as evidence of deliberate unfairness. Rather than accepting the committee's judgment, he concluded that faculty members had intentionally denied him recognition. Over time, this belief expanded beyond the award itself. Gang Lu began filing complaints challenging the decision and questioning the integrity of the department. He argued that professors had acted with bias, that influential faculty members were obstructing his future career, and that he had been treated unfairly because he was a foreign student. The available evidence indicates that he repeatedly expressed these grievances through formal letters and complaints. However, none of these efforts altered the university's decisions. The dissertation prize remained unchanged, and the faculty stood by their evaluations. For most academic disputes, disagreement eventually gives way to acceptance, even when disappointment remains. In Gang Lu's case, investigators later concluded that the opposite occurred. His resentment did not diminish with time. Instead, it intensified. What may have begun as frustration over a professional setback gradually developed into a fixed belief that multiple individuals within the university had intentionally sabotaged his career. Investigators would later recover letters and notes reflecting this growing sense of grievance. Rather than viewing the dissertation prize as one isolated decision, Gang Lu increasingly interpreted various academic interactions through the same lens of perceived injustice. Professors became, in his mind, participants in a broader pattern of discrimination and hostility. Administrative officials who rejected his complaints were no longer neutral decision-makers, but additional figures responsible for what he believed had happened. As his perception of these events hardened, the list of people he blamed gradually expanded. The investigation would ultimately conclude that this long period of accumulating resentment formed the central motive behind the attack that followed. While colleagues continued teaching classes, supervising students, and conducting research, few, if any, recognized the depth of Gang Lu's anger. Outwardly, university life continued according to its ordinary routines. Meetings were scheduled, research projects advanced, dissertations were completed, and faculty carried out their responsibilities. Beneath that ordinary surface, however, Gang Lu's sense of injustice continued to grow. Instead of seeing opportunities that remained ahead after earning his doctorate, he increasingly focused on what he believed had been taken from him. By the weeks leading up to November 1991, investigators would later determine that those beliefs had moved beyond frustration and into deliberate preparation. the brilliant young physicist who had once crossed an ocean in pursuit of scientific achievement was no longer planning experiments or future research. According to the evidence recovered after the attack, he had begun preparing for violence, directing his attention not toward advancing his academic career, but toward the individuals he believed had destroyed it. By the autumn of 1991, Gang Lu had achieved what many aspiring scientists spend years trying to accomplish. He had completed his doctoral research, successfully defended his dissertation, and earned a PhD in physics and astronomy from the University of Iowa. From the outside, his future still appeared full of possibilities. He possessed an advanced degree from a respected American university, years of specialized research experience, and the intellectual ability that had impressed many of the professors who had worked with him. Yet, according to the conclusions reached during the investigation, Gang Lu no longer viewed his future through the lens of opportunity. Instead, he had become consumed by the belief that his academic career had already been irreparably damaged. Investigators later concluded that the attack on November 1, 1991, was not the result of a sudden emotional collapse. Rather, it reflected a period of deliberate preparation that unfolded over several weeks. The evidence recovered after the shooting painted a picture of planning rather than impulse. While the University of Iowa continued operating as usual, Gang Lu quietly took a series of actions that would eventually allow investigators to reconstruct how the tragedy had been organized in advance. One of the clearest indications of preparation was his decision to legally purchase a firearm. He obtained a Taurus .38 special revolver, the weapon that would ultimately be used during the attack. The purchase itself was lawful and did not immediately attract attention. In 1991, acquiring such a firearm through legal channels was not uncommon, and nothing about the transaction alone suggested that it would later become part of a carefully planned multiple homicide. Investigators also determined that Gang Lu possessed a second handgun, a Jennings J. 22 chambered in .22 caliber. Although he carried it, this weapon was never used during the attack. Its presence nevertheless became another piece of evidence demonstrating that he had prepared himself with more than one firearm before arriving on campus that afternoon. The existence of the second weapon suggested forethought rather than improvisation, even though only the .38 caliber revolver was ultimately fired. In addition to acquiring the firearms, investigators found evidence that Gang Lu had practiced shooting before November 1st. Although the investigation did not identify every detail surrounding those practice sessions, the available evidence supported the conclusion that he had familiarized himself with the weapon before carrying out the attack. Such preparation required time, intention, and repeated decisions. It was another factor leading investigators away from any theory that the violence resulted from a spontaneous confrontation or an emotional outburst during the faculty meeting. Ammunition was also obtained in advance. Like the purchase of the revolver itself, acquiring ammunition demonstrated another practical step in preparing for violence. Each individual action, buying the firearm, obtaining ammunition, and practicing with the weapon, might appear ordinary when viewed in isolation. Considered together, however, investigators believe they formed part of a clear pattern of deliberate planning. Yet perhaps the most significant aspect of Gang Lu's preparation involved not the weapons themselves, but the people he intended to target. Evidence gathered after the attack indicated that he had identified specific individuals whom he held responsible for what he perceived as the destruction of his academic career. These were not random victims selected by circumstance. They were professors, administrators, and researchers connected in one way or another to the dissertation process, the disputed award, or the university's response to his complaints. Investigators concluded that Gang Lu had effectively created a target list long before November 1st arrived. The individuals ultimately attacked occupied positions that he believed had influenced the outcome of his academic recognition or the handling of his grievances. Professor Christoph Gertz had served as his doctoral advisor. Professor Robert Allen Smith had participated on his dissertation committee. Department Chair Dwight R. Nicholson represented the leadership of the physics and astronomy department. Lin Washan was the researcher whose nomination for the dissertation prize became the focal point of Gang Lu's resentment. T. and Cleary, serving as vice president for academic affairs, oversaw the review of academic complaints and therefore became another figure whom Gang Lu believed had failed to address what he considered serious injustice. Investigators later concluded that every principal target shared one common characteristic. Each had become connected, in Gang Lu's mind, to his growing belief that the university had deliberately undermined his future. Another important discovery concerned Gang Lu's apparent knowledge of departmental schedules. The research meeting held in room 309 of Van Allen Hall on November 1st was not a chance gathering. According to investigators, Gang Lu knew that faculty members would be assembled there that afternoon. This knowledge significantly strengthened the conclusion that the attack had been carefully timed. Rather than wandering through campus in search of random victims, he arrived at a location where he expected several of his intended targets to be present simultaneously. That expectation proved correct. The meeting allowed him to encounter multiple faculty members within moments of entering the room. Investigators later considered this timing another powerful indication of premeditation. If the attack had truly been spontaneous, it would have been unlikely to coincide so precisely with the presence of numerous intended victims in a single location. The preparation extended beyond scheduling. Following the shooting, investigators searched Gang Lu's residence, hoping to better understand his state of mind during the weeks leading up to the attack. Among the materials recovered were research documents, personal notes, and letters reflecting his dissatisfaction with the university. These writings documented his continuing complaints regarding the dissertation prize and his belief that faculty members had acted unfairly toward him. The materials did not reveal an elaborate manifesto or broad political ideology. Instead, they consistently pointed toward one central theme. Gang Lu believed that specific individuals within the university had intentionally harmed his academic career. Investigators viewed these writings as important because they connected his earlier complaints with the actions he ultimately carried out. The evidence demonstrated continuity between his growing resentment and the carefully selected victims of the attack. The notes, letters, and related documents also helped investigators determine that Gang Lu's anger had persisted over an extended period rather than emerging suddenly on the day of the shooting. The emotional progression reflected in those materials supported the conclusion that his grievances had become increasingly fixed over time. Each unsuccessful complaint appeared to reinforce his belief that he was the victim of deliberate injustice. Rather than resolving his disappointment, the passing weeks seemed only to strengthen his conviction that those responsible deserved to be held accountable. As investigators pieced together this timeline, they found no evidence suggesting that another individual had encouraged, assisted, or participated in the planning. Every indication pointed toward Gang Lu acting alone. His purchase of the firearms, his preparation, his selection of targets, and his movements on November 1st all reflected the actions of a single individual carrying out a plan that investigators believed he had developed independently. The absence of accomplices simplified one aspect of the investigation while simultaneously making the tragedy more difficult to comprehend. There was no wider conspiracy, no organized group, and no evidence that anyone else anticipated what was about to occur. Friends, colleagues, professors, and administrators continued their daily routines without realizing that one member of their academic community had already begun preparing for lethal violence. Perhaps the most sobering aspect of the investigation was how ordinary everything appeared before the attack. University offices remained open. Research meetings continued according to schedule. Faculty prepared lectures, answered student questions, and conducted experiments. Graduate students focused on dissertations, laboratory work, and future careers. Nothing outwardly distinguished November 1st from any other Friday during the semester. Yet beneath that ordinary routine, Gang Lu had already completed nearly every step necessary to carry out his plan. By the time he entered Van Allen Hall that afternoon, the decisions that would determine the fate of 6 victims had, according to investigators, already been made. The firearms had been purchased, the ammunition had been secured, practice had taken place, the targets had been identified, the meeting schedule had been observed, the grievances had been documented and allowed to grow unchecked. All that remained was the final step. Shortly before 3:42 p.m. on November 1st, 1991, Gang Lu walked toward Van Allen Hall, carrying the Taurus .38 special revolver that investigators would later identify as the weapon used in the attack. Inside room 309, professors and researchers continued discussing scientific work, unaware that one of their former colleagues was approaching with a plan that had been developing for weeks. Within moments, years of scholarship, mentorship, and ordinary academic routine would be interrupted by a series of gunshots that would permanently alter the history of the University of Iowa and leave an enduring scar on everyone connected to that quiet campus afternoon. On Friday, November 1st, 1991, the University of Iowa continued its routine without any indication that history was about to change. Students attended afternoon lectures, researchers worked in laboratories, and faculty members moved between offices and meeting rooms as they had done countless times before. Van Allen Hall, home to the Department of Physics and Astronomy, reflected that familiar rhythm. Inside its classrooms and offices, conversations centered on scientific research, ongoing projects, and the everyday responsibilities of university life. The building carried the quiet atmosphere typical of an academic department where discovery, discussion, and collaboration formed the foundation of daily work. Nothing suggested that within minutes it would become the scene of extraordinary violence. During the afternoon, members of the department gathered in room 309 for a regularly scheduled research meeting. Such meetings were a routine part of academic life. Faculty members assembled to discuss research activities, exchange ideas, and review ongoing work within the department. For those attending, there was no reason to expect anything other than another professional discussion among colleagues who had worked together for years. Among those present were Professor Christoph K. Gertz, Professor Robert Allen Smith, and researcher Lynn Washon. Elsewhere in the building, Department Chair Dwight R. Nicholson continued his own work, unaware that he too had become one of the intended targets of a carefully planned attack. At approximately 3:42 p.m., Gang Lu entered room 309. His arrival did not immediately draw attention. He was familiar to many of the people inside, having recently completed his doctoral studies within the department. He belonged to the academic community surrounding the meeting. No one reacted with alarm as he entered the room. There was no immediate argument, no raised voices, and no visible confrontation. According to witness accounts gathered afterward, nothing in those first moments suggested that violence was imminent. Then, without warning, Gang Lu produced a Taurus .38 special revolver from beneath his clothing. The first gunshot echoed through the room, abruptly ending the ordinary discussion that had been taking place only seconds earlier. In an instant, the atmosphere of academic routine disappeared, replaced by confusion and terror. Those inside the meeting struggled to understand what they were witnessing. A place associated with scientific collaboration had become the setting for a deadly, targeted attack. Gang Lu did not fire indiscriminately into the room. Investigators would later conclude that his actions demonstrated clear purpose. His first targets were individuals whom he believed had played roles in the academic decisions that had fueled his growing resentment over the preceding months. One of the first victims was Professor Christoph K. Gertz. As Gang Lu's doctoral advisor, Gertz had supervised his dissertation research throughout the years required to complete his PhD. He had worked closely with Lu in an academic relationship built around mentorship, scientific guidance, and professional development. On that afternoon, however, he became one of the first people struck by gunfire. Multiple shots hit Professor Gertz, and he died at the scene. His death marked the beginning of a tragedy that would unfold with remarkable speed. Gang Liu then turned his attention toward Professor Robert Allen Smith, another faculty member connected to his doctoral work. Smith had served on Liu's dissertation committee, participating in the evaluation of his research. During the initial burst of gunfire, Smith was struck multiple times. Although critically injured, he initially remained alive. The attack inside room 309, however, was not yet over. Another target was Linhua Shan, the researcher whose nomination for the prestigious D.C. Spriestersback Dissertation Prize had become the central focus of Gang Liu's grievances. Investigators later determined that Shan represented one of Gang Liu's primary targets because Liu believed the recognition should have gone to him instead. The two men had once shared living quarters after arriving in the United States, making the tragedy even more striking. Whatever friendship or familiarity had once existed between them had long since disappeared beneath. Gang Liu's growing conviction that Shan's nomination symbolized the unfair treatment he believed he had endured. During the attack, Shan was shot and killed inside the meeting room. Witnesses later described Gang Liu as unusually calm throughout the shooting. According to the accounts collected during the investigation, he spoke very little, if at all. There was no prolonged exchange of accusations or emotional confrontation. Instead, his movements appeared deliberate and controlled. The absence of chaotic behavior reinforced investigators' conclusion that the attack had been carefully planned long before he entered the room. While those present struggled to comprehend the unfolding violence, Gang Liu appeared focused on carrying out a sequence of predetermined actions. The initial attack inside room 309 unfolded in an extraordinarily brief period of time. Within less than 2 minutes, multiple victims had already been shot. The speed of the violence left almost no opportunity for organized resistance or intervention. Faculty members who had entered the room expecting a routine scientific discussion instead found themselves confronted with an event almost impossible to process in real time. As the shooting inside the meeting room paused, Gang Liu left room 309 rather than fleeing the building. According to investigators, he had another objective still to accomplish. He moved through Van Allen Hall searching for Professor Dwight R. Nicholson, the chair of the Department of Physics and Astronomy. Nicholson occupied one of the department's most senior leadership positions, overseeing faculty, academic administration, and graduate education. Investigators later concluded that Gang Liu regarded Nicholson as another individual responsible for the professional disappointments that had consumed him during the preceding months. Gang Liu located Nicholson in his office elsewhere within the building. Without warning, he opened fire once again. Nicholson was struck multiple times and died almost immediately. The attack on the department chair further demonstrated that Gang Liu was not simply reacting to circumstances as they unfolded. Instead, he was actively moving through the building in search of specific individuals whom he had previously identified as targets. The violence inside Van Allen Hall still had not completely ended. After shooting Nicholson, Gang Liu returned to room 309. This return would later become one of the most significant aspects of the investigation because it illustrated the degree of determination behind the attack. Rather than leaving the building after firing the initial shots, he deliberately came back to the meeting room. There he encountered Professor Robert Allen Smith, who had survived the first volley despite suffering severe injuries. According to investigators, Gang Liu fired additional shots at Smith, ensuring that he would not survive. This action strongly supported the conclusion that the attack was not an uncontrolled burst of emotion but a deliberate effort to kill particular individuals. By returning to room 309, Gang Liu demonstrated that his objective extended beyond creating fear or causing indiscriminate harm. He intended to complete what he had already begun. Remarkably, the entire sequence of violence within Van Allen Hall unfolded in approximately 90 seconds. In little more than a minute, years of academic collaboration had been shattered. Several respected members of the department had been killed, and countless lives had been permanently changed. The speed of the attack left behind scenes of devastation that would confront emergency responders. Only moments later, faculty members who survived found themselves surrounded by injured colleagues, overturned chairs, abandoned papers, and the sudden silence that follows unimaginable violence. Yet even after completing his attacks inside Van Allen Hall, Gang Lu did not attempt to escape. He had not finished carrying out the plan investigators would later reconstruct from the evidence recovered after his death. Leaving behind the department where he had once pursued scientific research, he walked out of the building and headed across the University of Iowa campus toward Jessup Hall, the administrative center of the university. There waited another individual whom he believed shared responsibility for the academic grievances that had come to dominate his thinking. The violence that had begun in the Department of Physics and Astronomy was about to spread beyond the faculty who had supervised his research and into the highest levels of the university's academic administration. By the time Gang Lu disappeared from Van Allen Hall, four people had already been mortally wounded, and a quiet Friday afternoon devoted to education and research had become one of the darkest days in the history of the University of Iowa. The next few minutes would determine the final chapter of the attack and leave an entire campus struggling to comprehend how a place dedicated to knowledge had become the scene of such profound loss. By the time Gang Lu stepped out of Van Allen Hall on the afternoon of November 1st, 1991, the Physics and Astronomy Department had already suffered catastrophic losses. Within approximately 90 seconds inside room 309 and elsewhere in the building, Professor Christoph K. Gertz, Professor Robert Allen Smith, researcher Linhua Shan, and Department Chair Dwight R. Nicholson had all been fatally wounded. Behind him, survivors were struggling to understand what had happened. The sounds of gunfire had transformed an ordinary research meeting into a scene of chaos. But the full scope of the tragedy was still unknown. While emergency assistance had not yet fully reached the victims inside Van Allen Hall, Gang Lu continued moving across the University of Iowa campus. He was not attempting to escape. According to investigators, his actions remained consistent with the plan he had prepared in advance. The attack was still unfolding, and another destination remained. Leaving the Department of Physics and Astronomy behind, Gang Lu walked toward Jessup Hall, the university's central administrative building. Unlike Van Allen Hall, which primarily housed scientific research and academic offices, Jessup Hall represented the administrative heart of the university. Decisions affecting students, faculty, and academic policies passed through its offices every day. Employees carried out their normal responsibilities, answered telephone calls, reviewed paperwork, and met with students seeking assistance. Like everyone else on campus that afternoon, those inside Jessup Hall had no warning that violence was approaching. Investigators later concluded that Gang Lu's destination had not been chosen at random. His intended target inside Jessup Hall was T. N. Cleary, the university's vice president for academic affairs. In that role, Cleary held responsibility for overseeing academic policies and reviewing formal complaints submitted by students. During the months following the decision regarding the dissertation prize, Gang Lu had repeatedly challenged what he believed was unfair treatment by members of the Physics and Astronomy Department. Those complaints had ultimately reached the university's academic administration. According to the investigation, Gang Lu became convinced that Cleary had failed to correct what he regarded as serious injustice. Whether university officials believed the complaints had merit or not, Gang Lu interpreted the outcome as further evidence that the institution itself had turned against him. In his increasingly rigid view of events, the disappointment surrounding the dissertation prize had expanded into a much broader belief that multiple individuals across different levels of the university shared responsibility for what he believed had happened to his career. By the time he entered Jessup Hall, investigators believed he had already decided that Cleary would become another target. The walk between the two buildings lasted only a matter of minutes. Yet during that brief journey, the university remained largely unaware of the danger. Students continued crossing sidewalks, faculty members remained inside offices, and administrative staff carried on with ordinary work. Few people could have imagined that the individual walking across campus had already carried out multiple killings and was moving toward another planned confrontation. The attack inside Van Allen Hall had unfolded so rapidly that information had not yet spread throughout the campus. Gang Lu entered Jessup Hall, carrying the same Taurus .38 special revolver used during the earlier shootings. His destination was in Cleary's office. According to investigators, when he reached the office, he immediately opened fire, and Cleary was struck by gunfire in the head and chest. The injuries were catastrophic. Emergency medical personnel would later transport her to the hospital, where doctors attempted to save her life. Despite those efforts, she died the following day. Her death extended the tragedy beyond the physics and astronomy department and into the highest levels of the university's academic administration. It also reinforced investigators' conclusion that Gang Lu's actions were directed toward individuals whom he associated with his unresolved grievances rather than toward random members of the university community. Inside the office within Cleary was Mia Rodolfo Siason, a student employee working part-time. Unlike the faculty members and administrators whom Gang Lu believed were connected to his complaints, Rodolfo Siason had no involvement in the evaluation of his dissertation, the selection of academic awards, or the review of university grievances. She was simply present when the attack occurred. During the shooting, she was struck by gunfire in the face and neck. The bullet caused devastating damage to her spinal cord. Although she survived the attack, the injury left her paralyzed from the neck down. In an instant, her life changed permanently. The physical injuries she sustained would require years of medical care and fundamentally alter every aspect of her daily life. She would continue living with those injuries for many years before ultimately dying in 2008 from complications related to the paralysis caused by the shooting. Her death later increased the total number of fatalities connected to the attack from 5 to 6. The inclusion of Rodolfo Siason among the victims serves as a painful reminder that acts of targeted violence often inflict devastating consequences upon individuals who were never intended participants in the underlying conflict. Once the shooting inside Jessup Hall had ended, Gang Lu reached the final stage of the plan investigators would later reconstruct. By this point, emergency calls had begun reaching law enforcement authorities. Reports of gunfire were spreading rapidly, although confusion remained about exactly what had occurred and whether multiple attackers might be involved. Officers and emergency responders moved toward the university as quickly as possible, attempting to locate the source of the violence and assist the injured. Before police could confront him, however, Gang Lu made his final decision. At approximately 3:52 p.m., less than 10 minutes after the first gunshot inside Van Allen Hall, he turned the revolver on himself and fired a single shot into his own head. Responding officers reached him shortly afterward. Although he was still showing signs of life when they arrived, his injuries were fatal. He died soon after. With his death, the immediate threat to the campus ended. There would be no hostage situation, no prolonged standoff, and no opportunity for investigators to question him regarding his motives. The only explanations available would come from the evidence left behind, including documents recovered during the investigation and the carefully reconstructed sequence of events. As emergency responders secured both Van Allen Hall and Jessup Hall, the scale of the tragedy gradually became clear. Inside Van Allen Hall, medical personnel worked urgently to reach the victims scattered throughout the building. Faculty members and survivors struggled to process the events they had just witnessed. Ordinary meeting rooms had become crime scenes. Offices that had represented years of academic work were now places marked by profound loss. In Jessup Hall, physicians fought to save and Cleary, while Mia Rodolfo Siason began the long and difficult medical journey that would define the remainder of her life. News of the shooting spread quickly across the university and beyond Iowa City. Initial reports described multiple victims and a gunman who had died at the scene. But the complete picture emerged only gradually as investigators confirmed identities and notified families. By the end of the day, the University of Iowa community faced a reality that few institutions had experienced at that time. 5 people had lost their lives as a direct result of the attack: Professor Christoph K. Gertz, Professor Robert Allen Smith, Department Chair Dwight R. Nicholson, Researcher Lenoir Sean, and Vice President for Academic Affairs T. and Cleary, who succumbed to her injuries the following day. Mia Rodolfo Siason survived, but with catastrophic spinal injuries that left her permanently paralyzed. Years later, when she died from complications related to those injuries, the human cost of the attack became even greater. Investigators would ultimately determine that the entire sequence, from the first shot fired inside room 309 at approximately 3:42 p.m. to Gang Lu's suicide around 3:52 p.m., had unfolded in less than 10 minutes. Within that remarkably brief period, one individual acting alone had permanently altered the lives of families, colleagues, students, and an entire university community. The violence had begun in a routine faculty meeting, spread across campus to the university's administrative center, and ended only when the gunman took his own life. The physical attack was over, but for investigators, university officials, survivors, and the victims' families, the search for understanding had only just begun. With no suspect left alive to question, every answer would have to come from careful examination of the evidence he left behind, the documents recovered from his residence, and the long trail of grievances that investigators believed had culminated in one of the darkest days in the history of the University of Iowa. When the gunfire finally ended on the afternoon of November 1st, 1991, the University of Iowa faced an overwhelming scene of devastation. Within less than 10 minutes, multiple locations across the campus had become crime scenes. Van Allen Hall, where faculty members had gathered for a routine research meeting, contained the bodies of respected scientists and educators. Jessup Hall, the administrative center of the university, had become the site of another deadly attack that claimed the life of a senior administrator and left a student employee catastrophically injured. The gunman, Gang Lu, had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound before law enforcement officers could take him into custody. Because there would be no interrogation and no criminal trial, investigators immediately understood that the answers to one of the most important questions, why this had happened, would have to come entirely from physical evidence, documents, witness testimony, and the careful reconstruction of the events leading to the attack. The first priority for responding officers and emergency personnel was securing both crime scenes. Van Allen Hall and Jessup Hall were immediately treated as active homicide investigations. Investigators documented each location, carefully recording the positions of victims, collecting physical evidence, and establishing an accurate timeline of the attack. Because the shootings had occurred in 2 separate buildings, investigators needed to reconstruct Gang Lu's movements from the moment he entered room 309 until the moment he died outside the office of T. and Cleary. Witness statements became an essential part of this effort. Faculty members and other individuals who had survived the attack described the sequence of events. Inside the research meeting, their accounts consistently indicated that Gang Lu entered the room without attracting suspicion, before suddenly producing a Taurus .38 special revolver and opening fire. Several witnesses also described his behavior during the attack as calm and purposeful. According to the information collected during the investigation, he spoke very little, if at all. There was no prolonged argument, no emotional confrontation, and no attempt to negotiate with those present. Instead, his actions appeared deliberate from beginning to end. These observations would later support the conclusion that the shooting had been planned in advance, rather than triggered by a spontaneous confrontation inside the meeting. The physical evidence collected at Van Allen Hall reinforced that conclusion. Investigators reconstructed the order in which the shootings occurred, confirming that Professor Christoph K. Gertz, Professor Robert Allen Smith, and researcher Lin Hua Shan had been attacked during the meeting before Gang Lu left the room to search for Department Chair Dwight R. Nicholson elsewhere in the building. They also established that after shooting Nicholson, Gang Lu returned to room 309 and fired additional shots at Robert Smith, who had initially survived the first volley. That return to the meeting room became one of the strongest pieces of evidence demonstrating intent. Rather than fleeing after the initial attack, Gang Lu deliberately came back to ensure that one of his intended victims did not survive. Investigators viewed this sequence as clear evidence that the killings were directed towards specific individuals rather than resulting from indiscriminate violence. A similar pattern emerged from the evidence gathered at Jessup Hall. Investigators determined that Gang Lu had entered the building with the specific intention of reaching the office of T. and Cleary, the university's vice president for academic affairs. Once there, he immediately opened fire, critically wounding Cleary and seriously injuring Mia Rodolfo Siason, a student employee working in the office. Shortly afterward, he ended the attack by shooting himself. The rapid progression of events left investigators with a clear chronology. The entire attack had unfolded in approximately 10 minutes, beginning around 3:42 p.m. in Van Allen Hall and ending around 3:52 p.m. in Jessup Hall. With the immediate crime scene secured, investigators turned their attention to Gang Lu's residence. The search of his living quarters became one of the most important components of the investigation, because it offered the only opportunity to understand his state of mind before the shootings. Inside, investigators recovered research materials, personal notes, correspondence, and documents connected to his academic career. Among the most significant discoveries were letters and written materials expressing his dissatisfaction with the outcome of the dissertation prize selection and his broader grievances against the university. These documents demonstrated that his frustration had not been limited to a single disappointment. Instead, the writings reflected an extended period of resentment during which he repeatedly argued that members of the physics and astronomy department had treated him unfairly, denied him recognition he believed he deserved, and obstructed his future academic career. The documents also showed that he had continued pursuing complaints after the dissertation prize decision, believing that university officials had failed to correct what he considered a serious injustice. Investigators regarded these writings as crucial because they established a direct connection between Gang Lu's long-standing grievances and the individuals ultimately targeted during the attack. They also recovered evidence indicating that Gang Lu had prepared for the shootings before November 1. Investigators found materials demonstrating that he had legally acquired the Taurus .38 special revolver used during the attack, possessed a second firearm that ultimately was not used, obtained ammunition, practiced shooting, and monitored the schedule of the departmental research meeting. These discoveries strongly supported the conclusion that the violence had been carefully planned. Over a period of weeks, there was no evidence suggesting that the shootings resulted from a sudden emotional breakdown or an argument that unexpectedly escalated into violence. Instead, every significant piece of evidence pointed toward deliberate preparation. Investigators also examined whether anyone else might have participated in planning or encouraging the attack. This question was especially important given the coordinated nature of the shootings and the movement between two separate buildings. However, despite a thorough review of the available evidence, investigators found no indication of accomplices. The planning, acquisition of weapons, selection of targets, and execution of the attack all appear to have been carried out by Gang Lu acting alone. No evidence suggested that another individual had assisted him, shared knowledge of his intentions, or participated in any aspect of the crime. As investigators compared witness testimony with the documents recovered from Gang Lu's residence, a consistent picture emerged. The victims were not selected randomly. Each person who had been intentionally targeted occupied a position that Gang Lu associated with the academic disappointments that had increasingly dominated his thinking. Professor Christoph K. Gertz had supervised his doctoral research. Professor Robert Allen Smith had served on his dissertation committee. Department Chair Dwight R. Nicholson represented the leadership of the department. Lin Washan had received the dissertation prize nomination that Gang Lu believed should have been awarded to him. And Cleary had responsibility for reviewing academic complaints that Gang Lu believed had not been properly addressed. Even though these individuals served different roles within the university, investigators concluded that Gang Lu viewed them collectively as responsible for what he perceived to be the destruction of his academic future. One victim, however, stood apart from that pattern. Mia Rodolfo Siason had no involvement in dissertation evaluations, faculty decisions, or university administration beyond her role as a student employee working in and Cleary's office. Investigators concluded that she became a victim simply because she was present when Gang Lu carried out the final stage of his attack. Her devastating injuries illustrated the tragic reality that even carefully targeted acts of violence often harm innocent bystanders whose only connection to the event is being in the wrong place at the wrong time. After reviewing the physical evidence, witness statements, recovered documents, and the sequence of events, investigators reached their official conclusion. The University of Iowa shootings were determined to be a premeditated, targeted attack motivated by Gang Lu's long-standing resentment over the dissertation prize decision and his broader belief that members of the university had deliberately undermined his academic career. His complaints, letters, and personal writings demonstrated that these grievances had developed over an extended period rather than emerging suddenly on the day of the attack. Because Gang Lu died by suicide before he could be arrested, the investigation itself became the final means of establishing both motive and responsibility. There would be no courtroom testimony, no cross-examination, and no judicial determination of guilt. Instead, the evidence collected by investigators formed the official record explaining how one of the brightest students in the Department of Physics and Astronomy came to carry out one of the deadliest targeted attacks ever committed on an American university campus. Although the investigation answered many factual questions about planning, motive, and responsibility, it could not undo the loss experienced by families, colleagues, students, and an entire academic community. Its conclusions instead provided the foundation for understanding a tragedy that would continue to influence conversations about campus safety, academic pressure, grievance management, and violence in higher education for many years to come. In the days and weeks following the University of Iowa shootings, the campus community was forced to confront a reality that seemed impossible to reconcile with the environment they knew. A university is traditionally viewed as a place where disagreements are settled through discussion, where ideas are challenged through debate, and where conflicts are addressed through established systems of communication. The events of November 1st, 1991, shattered that sense of security. The violence had not occurred in an unfamiliar or distant location. It had happened inside buildings where professors taught, researchers worked, and students pursued their futures. Van Allen Hall and Jessup Hall were not simply crime scenes. They were places connected to years of education, discovery, and personal achievement. After the attack ended, the University of Iowa community was left facing two difficult tasks: mourning those who had been lost and attempting to understand how such a tragedy could have occurred within an academic institution. The immediate loss was overwhelming. 5 people died as a direct result of the shooting, and another victim would later pass away from complications related to the injuries she suffered that day. Each person affected represented more than a name in an investigation report. They were colleagues, mentors, friends, family members, and members of a community that had depended on their presence. Professor Christoph K. Gertz had dedicated his career to scientific research and education. As a respected physicist and mentor, he had played an important role in guiding students through the demanding process of advanced research. His death represented the loss of not only a scholar, but also a teacher whose influence extended through those he had trained. Professor Robert Allen Smith was also remembered for his contributions to the Department of Physics and Astronomy. As a member of Gang Lu's dissertation committee, he had participated in the academic evaluation process that later became central to the attacker's grievances. However, beyond that professional connection, he was a colleague whose absence affected everyone who had worked alongside him. Linhua Shan, the researcher whose dissertation prize nomination became one of the central points of Gang Lu's resentment, became one of the most tragic figures in the case. The investigation found no evidence that Shan had done anything to cause the outcome that angered Gang Lu. Yet he became one of the individuals directly targeted because of the meaning Gang Lu attached to the award decision. His death demonstrated how personal perceptions of injustice can transform unrelated individuals into symbols of anger and blame. Dwight R. Nicholson, chair of the Department of Physics and Astronomy, was another victim whose professional role placed him within Gang Lu's distorted understanding of responsibility. As department chair, Nicholson represented institutional leadership, but the evidence showed that Gang Lu's anger was based on his own interpretation of events rather than proof that Nicholson had acted improperly. His death removed a respected academic leader and left the department facing not only grief but also the difficult process of rebuilding. T. and Cleary, vice president for academic affairs, became the final intended target before Gang Lu ended the attack. Her position required her to oversee academic matters and respond to university concerns, including formal complaints. Because of this responsibility, Gang Lu viewed her as someone who had failed to resolve his grievances. She was seriously injured during the attack and died the following day despite medical efforts. Her death expanded the tragedy beyond the Department of Physics and Astronomy, affecting the broader university administration and the entire campus community. The story of Mia Rodolfo Siason was different from the others, yet equally devastating. She had no role in the dissertation process, the dissertation prize decision, or the academic complaints that fueled Gang Lu's anger. She was simply working in Cleary's office when the attack reached Jessup Hall. The injury she suffered changed her life permanently. The gunshot damage to her spinal cord left her paralyzed from the neck down. Although she survived the immediate attack, she lived with severe physical limitations for many years before dying in 2008 from complications connected to those injuries. Her survival initially represented a moment of hope amid tragedy, but her later death served as a reminder that the consequences of violence often continue long after the day an attack occurs. In the aftermath, the university also had to confront difficult questions about academic pressure, conflict resolution, and the warning signs that may have existed before the shooting. Investigators had determined that Gang Lu's actions were planned and that his resentment had developed over time. His complaints regarding the dissertation prize and his belief that he had been treated unfairly had been expressed through letters and formal grievances. The tragedy led many people to consider how universities respond when individuals become deeply dissatisfied with academic decisions. Academic environments naturally involve criticism, competition, and rejection. Research ideas are challenged, applications are denied, and awards are given to one person rather than another. These decisions are part of the structure of scholarly institutions. However, the University of Iowa shootings demonstrated the devastating consequences that can occur when an individual becomes unable to accept those outcomes and begins viewing ordinary professional disagreements as deliberate attacks. The tragedy also contributed to broader discussions across American universities about campus safety. In 1991, large-scale targeted shootings at universities were far less common in public awareness than they would become in later decades. The attack at Iowa became one of the events that forced educational institutions to reconsider how they identified potential risks, respond to serious complaints, and provide support for individuals experiencing intense personal or professional distress. Following the shooting, the University of Iowa strengthened efforts related to mental health support, threat assessment, and emergency response planning. These changes reflected a difficult lesson learned from the tragedy. Universities must protect not only intellectual freedom and academic achievement, but also the safety and well-being of the people who make those communities possible. The university also created lasting memorials to honor those who were lost. In 1992, a walkway was named the T. and Cleary Walkway, preserving her memory and recognizing her service to the institution. Years later, the university continued to remember the victims and reflect on the impact of the attack. In 2016, on the 25th anniversary of the shooting, the university held a memorial ceremony and established a monument dedicated to those whose lives were taken or forever changed. These acts of remembrance served an important purpose. They shifted attention away from the person who committed the violence and toward the individuals, whose lives deserve to be honored. In discussions of mass violence, there is often a danger that the perpetrator becomes the central figure while victims become secondary. The University of Iowa community chose a different path by preserving the names and contributions of those affected. The story of November 1st, 1991, is therefore not only the story of Gang Liu and the decisions that led him to commit an unthinkable act. It is also the story of the people who lost their lives, the colleagues who mourned them, the families who carried their absence, and the institution that had to rebuild after tragedy. The investigation could explain how the attack happened, but it could not fully answer the deeper questions surrounding human behavior, resentment, and the transformation of disappointment into violence. What remained most important was the recognition that the victims were more than participants in a criminal case. They were individuals with careers, relationships, ambitions, and lives that mattered. Decades after the shooting, the University of Iowa continues to remember November 1st, 1991, not only as a day of profound tragedy, but also as a reminder of the responsibility to protect communities built around learning, cooperation, and shared human achievement. More than 3 decades after the events of November 1st, 1991, the University of Iowa shootings remain one of the most significant acts of targeted violence in the history of American higher education. The attack was not only remembered because of the number of lives lost, but also because of the questions it raised about academic pressure, institutional responsibility, personal grievances, and the challenges of recognizing when frustration becomes something far more dangerous. The tragedy left a permanent mark on the university, the families of the victims, and the broader academic community. Although the physical evidence was collected and the investigation reached its conclusions, the emotional consequences continued long after the final shots were fired. The story of the University of Iowa murders became part of a larger national conversation about safety on college campuses and the responsibility of institutions to protect the people who study and work within them. At the time of the attack, the idea of a targeted shooting inside a major research university was deeply shocking. Universities were traditionally viewed as places where disagreements were resolved through discussion, where professional conflicts were handled through established procedures, and where intellectual competition existed within a framework of respect. The shooting challenged that assumption. It demonstrated that even communities built around knowledge and reason could experience devastating violence when personal grievances became deeply entrenched. One of the most lasting impacts of the tragedy was the increased attention given to the relationship between academic pressure and personal distress. Graduate education can be an intense environment. Students pursuing advanced degrees often invest years of their lives into research projects, hoping their work will lead to professional opportunities and recognition. The process involves evaluation, criticism, competition, and uncertainty. Dissertation committees must make difficult decisions. Awards can only go to selected candidates. Academic careers often depend on recommendations and judgments made by others. These realities are fundamental parts of scholarly life, But the University of Iowa case demonstrated the importance of recognizing how individuals respond when they experience disappointment or believe they have been treated unfairly. Gang Lu's actions were not caused by a single event alone. According to investigators, his anger developed over time, centered initially around the dissertation prize decision and later expanding into a broader belief that multiple individuals within the university had harmed his career. His letters, notes, and complaints showed a continuing pattern of dissatisfaction and resentment. The investigation concluded that he interpreted academic decisions and administrative responses as deliberate acts against him. The tragedy forced universities to consider how they respond when someone repeatedly expresses intense dissatisfaction and appears unable to move beyond a grievance. After the shooting, the University of Iowa and other institutions across the country placed greater emphasis on systems designed to identify potential risks before they become emergencies. This included improving communication between departments, strengthening support services, and developing procedures for responding to situations involving serious concerns about individuals' behavior or emotional state. The goal was not to punish people for disagreement or criticism, but to recognize when ordinary disputes may be developing into situations requiring additional attention. Another important legacy of the tragedy involved the way the victims were remembered. In the aftermath of violent crimes, public attention often becomes focused on the person who committed the act. However, the University of Iowa community worked to ensure that the identities and contributions of the victims remained central to the memory of the event. Professor Christoph K. Gertz was remembered for his scientific work and his role as a mentor. His career represented years of research, teaching, and commitment to advancing knowledge in physics. Professor Robert Allen Smith was remembered not only for his academic position, but also for his contributions to the department and the students he taught. Lynn Washon was remembered as a talented researcher whose life ended because he became associated with a grievance that was not his responsibility. His death illustrated the tragic consequences of being transformed into a symbol within someone else's personal conflict. Dwight R. Nicholson was remembered as a department leader whose life was taken while performing the responsibilities of academic administration. His position placed him in a role where he represented the institution, but the investigation found no evidence that he had done anything to justify the anger directed toward him. T. and Cleary was remembered for her service to the university and her dedication to academic affairs. Her death represented the loss of an administrator who had devoted her career to higher education. The university later honored her memory through the naming of the T. and Cleary Walkway in 1992. Mia Rodolfo Siason represented another dimension of the tragedy. Her experience showed that the consequences of targeted violence extend beyond those who are intentionally selected. She was not connected to the academic disagreements that motivated Gang Lu. She was simply present in the wrong place when the attack reached Jessup Hall. The injury she suffered affected every part of her life, leaving her paralyzed from the neck down. Her survival after the shooting was a testament to endurance. But her death in 2008 from complications related to her injuries demonstrated that the effects of violence can continue for decades. The memorial efforts surrounding the University of Iowa shootings also reflected a broader understanding of how communities recover after tragedy. Memorials do not erase loss, but they provide a way to acknowledge the significance of those who died and to preserve their place in institutional history. The university's later commemorations, including the 25th anniversary remembrance in 2016 and the establishment of a memorial honoring the victims, serve as reminders that the event was not only about the day of violence itself, but also about the lives and contributions that came before it. The tragedy also remains significant because it occurred before the modern era of widespread national attention towards school and campus shootings. In later years, other university attacks would bring similar questions about prevention, warning signs, and emergency response into public discussion. The University of Iowa case became part of that history, representing an early example of the challenges institutions would increasingly face in balancing openness and safety. Universities are designed to encourage debate, disagreement, and the exchange of ideas. They cannot eliminate conflict because disagreement is an essential part of intellectual progress. However, the lessons from November 1st, 1991, emphasize the importance of ensuring that conflicts have constructive paths toward resolution and that individuals experiencing intense distress have access to appropriate support. Perhaps the most important lesson from the University of Iowa murders is that behind every statistic are human lives. The case is often described through numbers: 6 deaths connected to the attack, 1 perpetrator, 2 buildings, a brief period of violence. But those numbers cannot fully represent what was lost. They do not describe the families who received devastating news, the students who lost mentors, the colleagues who returned to offices forever changed by what happened there, or the survivor who spent the rest of her life adapting to injuries caused by a few moments of violence. The passage of time has not removed the significance of the tragedy. Instead, it has allowed the university community to reflect on the deeper meaning of what happened. The University of Iowa shootings remain a reminder that institutions are made of people, and protecting those communities requires attention not only to physical security but also to human relationships, communication, and compassion. The victims continue to be remembered not because of how they died, but because of how they lived. Their contributions, their careers, and their impact on others remain the lasting legacy of a tragedy that changed the University of Iowa forever. In the years following the University of Iowa shootings, investigators, university officials, and academic communities continued to examine the circumstances that surrounded the tragedy. The attack had a clear sequence, a clear motive established through evidence, and a clear conclusion regarding responsibility. Gang Liu had acted alone, carefully selected his targets, prepared the weapons, and carried out a plan that ended with his own death. Yet even after those facts were established, difficult questions remained. Could the attack have been prevented? Were there moments when the situation could have been recognized as becoming dangerous? How should universities respond when a person feels deeply wronged and refuses to accept institutional decisions? These questions did not have simple answers, but they became part of the lasting impact of the case. One of the most significant aspects of the investigation was the discovery that Gang Liu's anger had not appeared suddenly on the day of the shooting. The evidence showed a progression that developed over time. His disappointment began with the decision regarding the D.C. Spriestersback Dissertation Prize. But investigators concluded that his resentment expanded beyond that single event. He came to believe that multiple people within the university had intentionally harmed his academic future. His complaints, letters, and personal writings demonstrated that he repeatedly returned to these beliefs. Rather than viewing the award decision as one difficult moment in an academic career, he interpreted it as proof that he had been treated unfairly by a larger system. This distinction became important when experts and institutions later studied the case. Academic disappointment itself is common. Every university contains students and researchers who experience rejection, criticism, or decisions they disagree with. Scholarships, awards, positions, and research opportunities are limited, meaning that not everyone receives the outcome they hope for. The vast majority of people experience these setbacks without responding with violence. The tragedy at the University of Iowa was not simply the result of losing an award. According to investigators, it was the result of how Gang Liu processed that disappointment over time, transforming professional frustration into a fixed belief that others were responsible for destroying his future. His perception of events became increasingly centered on blame. Individuals who had participated in academic evaluation processes became, in his mind, responsible for his struggles. The investigation showed that his targets were chosen because of their connection to these beliefs. Professor Christoph Gertz, Professor Robert Smith, Lin-Hua Shan, Dwight Nicholson, and T. and Cleary were not random victims. Each represented a different part of the university structure that Gang Lu believed had failed him. This pattern demonstrated one of the most important lessons of the case. Targeted violence often develops from a person's interpretation of events rather than from the events themselves. The same academic decision that one person may experience as disappointment can become, in another person's mind, evidence of intentional harm. Understanding that difference became a major challenge for universities after the tragedy. Another important issue raised by the case involved communication. Universities depend on formal processes for resolving disagreements. Students and researchers must have the ability to challenge decisions, submit complaints, and request reviews. Academic freedom requires that individuals be able to question authority and express dissatisfaction. However, the University of Iowa shootings demonstrated the difficulty of recognizing when repeated complaints have moved beyond ordinary disagreement and become signs of a deeper crisis. Gang Lu had expressed his dissatisfaction through official channels. He wrote letters, raised concerns, and challenged decisions that affected him. These actions alone were not unusual. Many members of academic communities disagree with decisions made by committees or administrators. The challenge lies in identifying when a grievance becomes so central to an individual's identity that compromise or acceptance becomes impossible. The investigation did not suggest that the university ignored a clear prediction of violence or that anyone could have known exactly what Gang Lu intended to do. The attack involved a level of preparation and personal decision-making that made it difficult to anticipate. Gang Lu purchased firearms legally, practiced shooting, and carefully selected his targets. These actions developed privately, outside the view of most people around him. Many colleagues knew him as intelligent and reserved, but they did not know the full extent of the anger reflected in the writings later recovered by investigators. This gap between outward appearance and internal resentment became one of the most troubling aspects of the case. The tragedy also highlighted the importance of supporting individuals during periods of intense academic or personal stress. Graduate students, researchers, and faculty members often work under significant pressure. The pursuit of advanced knowledge requires dedication, but it can also involve isolation, uncertainty, and repeated evaluation. Institutions must balance maintaining high standards with ensuring that individuals facing difficult moments have access to guidance and support. After the shooting, the University of Iowa and other universities strengthened efforts related to mental health resources, threat assessment, and emergency preparedness. These changes reflected a broader understanding that campus safety involves more than physical protection. It also involves creating environments where concerns can be addressed before they become more serious. However, the tragedy also required careful consideration of another principle. Not every person who is angry, frustrated, or dissatisfied represents a danger. Universities cannot treat disagreement itself as a warning sign. A healthy academic environment requires criticism, debate, and the freedom to challenge decisions. The challenge is identifying situations where behavior suggests a potential threat rather than simply an expression of disagreement. This balance remains one of the most complex issues facing educational institutions. The University of Iowa shootings also changed how many people viewed the relationship between achievement and identity. Gang Lu had invested years of effort into becoming a successful scientist. His intelligence and academic accomplishments were significant. However, investigators concluded that he eventually tied his sense of personal worth almost entirely to external recognition and professional success. When he believed that recognition had been denied to him, the disappointment became much larger than the loss of an award. It became, in his mind, evidence that his entire future had been taken away. The tragedy demonstrated the danger of allowing one setback to become the defining meaning of one's life. For the victims' families and the University of Iowa community, however, The most important questions were not only about prevention, but also about remembrance. The people who died were not defined by the circumstances of their deaths. They were scientists, educators, administrators, and members of a community who had dedicated their lives to learning and teaching. The lasting responsibility was to remember them as individuals rather than simply as victims of a crime. As years passed, the University of Iowa continued to honor their memory while also reflecting on the lessons of the attack. The tragedy became part of the university's history, but it did not define the institution entirely. Instead, the response focused on rebuilding trust, improving support systems, and ensuring that the lives lost would continue to have meaning. Ultimately, the University of Iowa shootings remain a case that raises difficult questions without offering easy answers. Investigators were able to explain what happened, who was responsible, and what motivated the attack. But understanding the deeper transformation from academic disappointment to planned violence remains a more complicated challenge. The case serves as a reminder that behind every act of violence there are decisions, perceptions, and moments that shape the path toward tragedy. It also serves as a reminder that communities must remain attentive not only to security measures, but to the human experiences that exist beneath the surface. The legacy of November 1st, 1991, is therefore not only a story of loss, but also a continuing lesson about responsibility, awareness, and the importance of protecting the people who make universities places of discovery and hope. The University of Iowa shootings of November 1st, 1991, remain one of the darkest chapters in the history of American higher education. More than 30 years later, the event continues to be remembered not only because of the violence that occurred that afternoon, but because of the lives that were interrupted, the questions it raised, and the lessons that followed. The attack lasted only a few minutes, but its consequences extended across decades. Families lost loved ones. A university community lost respected members. A survivor carried permanent injuries. And an institution built around education and discovery was forced to confront the reality that even places dedicated to knowledge and cooperation are not immune from tragedy. At the center of the case was Gang Liu, a highly intelligent researcher whose academic achievements once represented the promise of a successful scientific career. Born in China and recognized from a young age for his intellectual abilities, Liu had earned the opportunity to study in the United States through a prestigious academic pathway. At the University of Iowa, he pursued advanced research in physics and astronomy, eventually completing his doctoral dissertation. His work demonstrated significant ability, and his academic accomplishments suggested a future filled with possibilities. Yet the investigation into the shootings revealed that his perception of that future had changed dramatically. Instead of viewing himself as a scientist who had reached an important milestone, he came to believe that he had been denied the recognition he deserved and that others were responsible for his disappointment. The turning point identified by investigators was the decision involving the D.C. Spriestersback dissertation prize. Gang Liu believed his dissertation was the strongest candidate and that he should have received the honor. When the recognition went instead to Lin Shan, Liu interpreted the outcome not as a normal academic decision, but as evidence of unfair treatment. His dissatisfaction grew into a broader belief that professors, administrators, and university officials had damaged his career. Over time, this belief became the foundation for the attack that followed. The investigation demonstrated that the shootings were not random and were not committed against people selected by chance. Gang Liu carefully chose individuals whom he believed were connected to his grievances. Professor Christoph Gertz, Professor Robert Smith, researcher Lin Shan, Department Chair Dwight Nicholson, and Vice President for Academic Affairs T. and Cleary were targeted because of the roles they represented in Liu's understanding of what had happened to him. Each person became connected to a narrative that existed in his mind, regardless of whether they had actually caused the circumstances that frustrated him. The tragedy of the victims is that they were judged and condemned through someone else's distorted perception. On that Friday afternoon, they were not participants in a personal conflict. They were colleagues, educators, researchers, and administrators carrying out their ordinary responsibilities. The shooting inside Van Allen Hall began as a routine academic meeting. The people inside the room were not expecting danger. They were gathered to discuss research and professional matters, as they had done many times before. Within moments, that familiar environment was transformed into a scene of violence. Professor Christoph Gertz, who had guided Gang Lu's doctoral research, was killed. Professor Robert Smith, who had participated in evaluating Lu's dissertation, was also murdered. Lin Hua Shan, whose name had become linked to the dissertation prize in Lu's mind, lost his life. Dwight Nicholson, the department chair, was killed because of the leadership role he held. Then the violence continued at Jessup Hall, where T. and Cleary was attacked because Gang Lu believed she had failed to resolve his complaints. Mia Rodolfo Siason, who happened to be working in Cleary's office, became another victim despite having no connection to the academic dispute that motivated the attack. Her survival came at an enormous cost. The spinal cord injury she suffered left her paralyzed from the neck down, affecting every part of her life until her death in 2008 from complications related to those injuries. Her story represents the lasting impact of violence beyond the moment it occurs. While the attacker died on the day of the shooting, the consequences continued for survivors, families, and communities. The investigation that followed provided answers about the planning and motivation behind the attack. Evidence recovered from Gang Lu's residence showed that he had prepared carefully. Investigators found materials related to his grievances, documents reflecting his dissatisfaction, and evidence that he had obtained weapons, practiced shooting, and selected his targets in advance. There was no evidence of accomplices. The attack was carried out by one person who had spent time developing his plan. Because Gang Lu died by suicide, there was no criminal trial and no opportunity for a courtroom examination of his motives. Instead, investigators reconstructed the events through evidence and witness accounts. The official findings established that the attack was a planned act of revenge driven by resentment over academic decisions and personal grievances. However, the investigation could not provide a simple explanation for why a person with intelligence, education, and professional opportunities chose such a destructive path. That question remains one of the most difficult aspects of the case. The legacy of the University of Iowa shootings extends beyond the tragedy itself. The attack contributed to broader discussions about safety, mental health support, and the responsibilities of academic institutions. Universities across the country began paying greater attention to how they handle serious conflicts, how they identify potential risks, and how they support individuals experiencing extreme distress. These changes were not based on the belief that disagreement itself is dangerous. Academic environments depend on debate, criticism, and competition. Instead, the lesson was that institutions must remain aware of situations where unresolved grievances become deeply destructive. In remembering this tragedy, it is important not to allow the person who committed the violence to overshadow those whose lives were taken. The victims deserve to be remembered for their contributions, not only for the circumstances of their deaths. They represented the purpose of a university: teaching, research, leadership, and service. Their work influenced students, colleagues, and the broader academic community. The memorials created in their honor serve as reminders that their lives had meaning beyond the tragedy that ended them. The T. and Cleary Walkway and later memorial efforts at the University of Iowa reflect the institution's commitment to preserving the memory of those lost. They also represent a broader message that communities can acknowledge tragedy while continuing to move forward. The passage of time does not erase grief, but remembrance allows future generations to understand what happened and why it mattered. Ultimately, the University of Iowa murders are a story of loss, But they are also a story about responsibility. They remind us that behind every institution are individuals with hopes, struggles, achievements, and relationships. They remind us that conflicts, even painful ones, must be addressed through communication rather than destruction. Most importantly, they remind us that the true measure of a community is not only how it responds in moments of crisis, but how it remembers and honors those who were affected. On November 1st, 1991, a place devoted to learning experienced unimaginable violence. But the lasting memory of the University of Iowa is not only the tragedy that occurred that day. It is also the commitment to remembering the victims, supporting survivors, and ensuring that the lives lost continue to be recognized for the contributions they made before that terrible afternoon changed everything.